Good evening and welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I'm Diane Sayre, an independent LaRouche candidate for U.S. Senate in the 2024 elections. And I will be joined this evening by my husband, Christopher Sayre, to discuss actually our recent trip to China, which was incredibly exciting and interesting. And I want to discuss it in the context of what's happening in the world, because I know many of us are feeling extremely alarmed by the escalation of the war danger and also the threatened genocide against the people of Gaza with this unending blockade imposed by Israel, but with the backing of the United States. And I want to say very clearly that this could be lifted immediately if the United States would pressure Israel to end the blockade and allow the water, fuel, and food to reach the people who are desperately in need. Over 7,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th, including nearly 3,000 children. Collective punishment is a war crime, and condemning the genocide against the Palestinians does not mean endorsement or support of the attack by Hamas against the Israeli population, which occurred on October 7th. But I do think that we should find out how that could have occurred. How was Israel caught so flat-footed, off guard? And perhaps we should ensure that we're going after the proper target and not randomly slaughtering innocents, as the United States did after 9/11, when we refused to investigate what actually was behind it, and a couple years after the fact invaded Iraq, which had nothing to do with it, and killed 1 million people. So now the United States has been launching strikes on Iranian targets in Syria. Iran is not Iraq. This is a whole different order of escalation. It's extremely dangerous. But I wanted to start today with something that people may have forgotten, and that is the situation still ongoing here in Ukraine. You may know that President Biden wants a $100 billion budget lump sum, of which $60 billion will go to Ukraine. Now, this is no longer in the news because what all of us knew would happen is occurring. That is, Russia is winning. Ukraine doesn't stand a chance against Russia, no matter how many weapons you pour in there, no matter how many pro-Nazi sympathizers you support. Ukraine will lose. They've already lost at least 450,000 soldiers. It is a horrific toll, and that may be the price that an ally of the United States would pay. I think the people of Israel should consider what are the implications of being an ally of the United States and becoming the enemy of over 1 billion Muslims on the planet. Is this really going to be good for Israel? Is it going to be good for them to be in a protracted war? Do they actually think that Joe Biden is interested in their well-being? So this is not stopping. We're sending more weapons. It's just not being covered because the outcome which Joe Biden thinks he needs to get reelected, that is a defeat of Russia, is not occurring. And I just wanted to give you a sense of where Ukraine is in the world, right here above the Black Sea. This is a map provided by someone who shows certain hotspots. I don't know why they're calling Crimea a hotspot. I guess because it's being targeted by missiles that are being given by the US and UK and Germany to Ukraine. But Crimea has been quite stable since it voted to rejoin the Russian Federation overwhelmingly, I might add. But you see these other hotspots in Georgia, here's Armenia. Nagorno-Karabakh was just basically taken over by Azerbaijan, and at least 65,000 people fled into Armenia. You don't hear anything about this kind of dislocation and upheaval, mass movements of people who are being forced into to leave their homes, not because of climate change, but because of war policy. Now, I wanted to situate this so-called Middle East or Southwest Asia crisis. I'd like you to look at this map here and consider if you were going to launch a renaissance of mankind with massive economic development. You have China here with 1.4 billion people, India with about 1.4 billion people, Russia, this is labeled the Soviet Union. It's an old map, but 140, 150 million, but very advanced technology, the most advanced hypersonic weapons in the world, a robust space program. We used to depend on them to get our astronauts out to the space station. So here is Ukraine. Yes, a very old map prior to these nations getting their independence back. Turkey. And then here you have Israel, the occupied territories, right in this crossroads between Asia and Africa. And if you go this way, Europe, a very important region, which the British Empire always played if you were going to exercise divide and conquer games and keep people from working together. Also, here is Egypt and Ethiopia, Iran and Saudi Arabia, the newest members of the expanded BRICS countries. So I'd like you to just keep this in mind. Now, here is Israel, Palestine. This is, I guess, after Israel was given this land in 1947, 48. And here are the 67 borders, which I believe has to be the beginning of any negotiated settlement. Here you see in 2012 what the West Bank area looks like with all of the Israeli settlements, and something will have to be done about that, presumably. But the real question, how do you get peace, is that you have to bring economic development. And the number one issue in the region is the desert. It's the lack of water. This is something that Lyndon LaRouche put on the table in 1975 after he had had extensive meetings with the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, with leaders of the Israeli peace movement, a plan to green the deserts with all sorts of canals, nuclear power plants to desalinate water, the idea of creating an economic powerhouse in the region, which is exactly what Yitzhak Rabin was saying when he and Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, that you could take this region of industrious people, ancient civilizations, and turn it into a powerhouse for economic growth and development. And it's in those conditions that you can actually create peace. But how are we going to get there? And LaRouche had said in a speech in Connecticut in 2009 that you're going to require the large powers, the United States, Russia, and China, for starters, I would say, to come together to insist that there be a ceasefire, that the fighting stop, negotiations begin, and the region be developed. Now, I'll just leave that in mind, and we'll go to what we experienced in China, what we learned about China, and our thoughts on this situation and what the United States could learn from this. So, and here we are is a map of China. Also, again, just look at all of the nations bordering China. Look at this region. You can think of the obnoxiousness. Here's Taiwan, part of China, of Obama saying how outrageous it was that the Chinese thought they should be hegemonic in the East Asia, the sea over here. Of course, the United States should run it, don't you know? Really outrageous. And we have been involved in creating all kinds of conflicts. Here's North and South Korea, which former President Donald Trump nearly succeeded at ending the Korean War, but for the witch hunt against him and the denuclearization of North Korea. Not something that can be discussed right now, given the idea that this is going to be the next theater of war. And let me just say that the so-called Five Eyes intelligence agencies, the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, have got together and concluded that China is the #1 threat to the world. So is that true? Well, Chris and I wanted to find out. So here we are. Oh, and I just wanted to show this. When we arrived in China, what was going on was the Belt and Road Conference in Beijing. Security was a little bit tight, therefore. They had these posters and banners everywhere. There were 140 heads of state gathered. Okay, think about that. 140 nations, including Russia and China, major powers, Brazil, Argentina, you name it, there to discuss this. No coverage in the Western press whatsoever. And here we are. This is our arrival in Beijing. What I wanted to start with was this guan jar with a lid, which was made between 3400 and 4000 BC. And what I think is extraordinary about this is two things. One is the regularity of the shape, which indicates that in 4000 BC, they had figured out how to get a pottery wheel to turn. And in fact, we saw pictures of some of the parts of their pottery wheel. And what was pointed out at the museum, and I think very significant, is their interest in aesthetics. If you look at the design, there is ornamentation on this jar. It's not just plain, that clearly people had a sense of beauty and proportion already in 4000 BC. This is an ancient, this particular display is not that ancient, but in the 1400s, they had an observatory. This is from Beijing. And Chris, I don't know if you want to say something about this. I'll just show you this picture of these armillary spheres where people could calculate the orbits of the planets. And I want to show you one person here. This is a Chinese scientist who was born in 78 AD, who was the first scientist to design an armillary sphere. So if you think about the work of Kepler coming in the 1600s, how extraordinary it was that you had this work already going on in China.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, what's interesting is if you look at Leibniz, and he never visited China personally, but he wrote a beautiful book on the question of China and the compatibility between Confucian philosophy and Christian philosophy, Christian thought in Europe. And he was in a dialogue with a number of priests, Father Ricci and Father Verdienst, who also both have their statues there in this beautiful courtyard where this discussion, this dialogue was going on between Western Jesuit priests, astronomers, and Chinese astronomers. And this represented a potential for a true dialogue of civilizations and scientific progress in the 1600s. So it's quite fascinating, and it was really wonderful to be there uh, in the middle of this observatory that was up on top of a sort of a tower that they built. And anyway, so it was exciting to see. I had read about it, but then we saw it.
So we'll go on. So here you have a view of the Forbidden City. You needed tickets a week in advance, so we couldn't get tickets to go in, but we hiked up this very tall hill at the north end of the city to get a view of it. And Chris, if you want to say something about that as well.
Yeah, I mean the Forbidden City was built in 14 years, and this was in the Ming Dynasty. It was built by over 1 million laborers, and there are 9,999 rooms in these buildings, just one short of the city of heaven, is what they say. And so this was the home of 14 emperors from the Ming Dynasty and 10 emperors from the Qing Dynasty. It was the seat of government up until the revolution and the founding of the Republic of China. So very, very beautiful, very harmonious, and on this mountain, I mean, the mountain is beautiful also, and has very beautiful structures, very beautiful buildings that look down on it. In fact, where we are standing right there, there's a a plaque at your feet which says the center of Beijing, and Beijing means north capital. Bei is north, Jing is capital. So that was the so this this established Beijing as the capital of China.
Great. Now, I don't know why I jumped to this. I think because the food in China was incredible. This is breakfast. The first place we stayed in Beijing came with free breakfast, and you can see you could have wonton soup, fresh fruit. They even had coffee, which was hard to find in China, or tea, orange juice, steamed buns, dumplings. I don't know what this thing is called, sort of like an omelet, sausage, etc. I think I might have more food pictures. We're taking a little bit of a diversion. Yes, here is a dinner that we had with a very prominent musician and his family in Beijing. And we had the famous Peking duck, which you don't see here in the picture, chicken, lamb, and this is all on a large Lazy Susan that goes around, and you have to try to learn to not eat more than a couple teaspoons of anything that you like, because there's such a selection of food here. Oh, this was fish, which was boiling. Yeah, and remained boiling while we were there. This is a market in Beijing selling dried fruit of all different types. Absolutely delicious and wonderful. Let's see here. All right, here we are. So we're back. On the first day in Beijing, I just wanted to show a little bit, because back on this question of aesthetics and the idea of beauty, this is the Temple of Heaven Park. And they have the Temple to the Harvest, which we're going to see. But if you can tell here, there's a large walkway with very polished looking stones in the middle, and then one on each side, and the trees are all planted in rows, and it's just, again, completely beautifully proportioned. Although it's very crowded, it was quiet. You really got a sort of serene sense here, very beautiful and very huge. This is part of that park, one of the temples on the side. This is a apparently a famous, particularly significant structure, which is a fan-shaped, where the back part of this pagoda is larger than the front. You can see how ornate it is. This is a picture of the ceiling a little bit, and I'm going to show the ceiling of another one here, I think. Yeah, just look at that. This is the Temple of Longevity, and what they have are two circles in the roof intersecting. So this part over here is the intersection of these panels. Again, just completely beautiful. I don't know when this was built. Parts of this park were built again in the 1400s. So we'll see. And here is the Temple of the Harvest, and you can see thousands of Chinese tourists are here. The Chinese people are very proud of their nation. They are proud of their very long history and the beauty of the design of these structures. Anything you want to say about this, Chris, this park?
No, I think you captured it. It was
Okay.
quite beautiful. I mean, I
Now,
think one thing I would just say is that, it was somewhat crowded. There were a lot of tourists from obviously all over China that were coming here to see this. But in general, I mean, Beijing is a city of, I think, 23 million people. 23 million people. And um, it works, though. I mean, it's, there was traffic. There's no question there was traffic. Part of it was because the BRI conference was going on. So imagine like New York City during the UN General Assembly. I mean, there's heads of state being ushered through. So traffic can get, jammed up a bit. But there was plenty of room. There was plenty of space. There were parks everywhere. It was quite beautiful. Anyway, I just wanted to add that.
so this is from a restaurant roof where we had more food. Just looking down over parts of older Beijing, still operational, lots of little shops and homes tucked into this area. I just want to show it because you have the sense of a country developing and people being lifted out of grinding poverty to a very robust middle class, and therefore there's a certain kind of optimism among people and a lack of the type of anxiety that you see in the United States, where everybody is one paycheck away from being evicted or one parking ticket away from not being able to pay your groceries. The kind of extreme anxiety we experience here just was not the dynamic there. Now, here we are. People recognize this, the Great Wall. This is far from Beijing proper. We took a couple of trains or train traveled by car. It would be maybe about an hour and a half. Again, just throngs of people. The train was completely packed. You see me here on the wall, and if you look at this picture, you can see the wall going up and down these hills. Here it is over here, extending into the distance. I think before parts of it fell into disrepair, it was something like 3,500 miles of wall, which is really impossible to imagine. And look at the size of it. It was extremely cold and windy. Also, I was struck that you had families, again, Chinese tourists from all over the place, and it was clearly something people considered important. You had a number of elderly people climbing around here, and their children, who were my age, they were perhaps in their 70s or even 80s, were taking them by the arm, helping them up the steep incline so they could see this. And here we are at one of the towers. You can see here, in some cases, there were steps. Here there were no steps, and people are just hiking up this very, very steep incline. Chris, any thoughts about this?
Um, I mean, we went to this particular area. It's actually still in Beijing. Beijing is huge area wise, but this little town is called Badaling, which is Ba is eight, eight towers. So we walked from tower to tower. I think we did walk through all eight towers of the north wall, and then ended up in a little town which had like a court where obviously they had sort of a base of operations, maybe for building the wall at one point, parts of the wall. But an amazing structure to defend the inner part of China, and people were very happy, and we kept getting young students, Chinese students, who were very intrigued to see us there, because there were some non-Chinese tourists there other than ourselves, but few and far between. Most of the tourists there are again from all over China coming to see this, and the young students would come up to us, and they said, hello, hello, can we take a picture with you? And so they were very friendly, very happy to see us, happy to know that Americans were there and interested in seeing China as well.
Great. Now here is the high-speed trail. So we had spent 4 days in train, 4 days in Beijing, and then we traveled by train to Shanghai. It's about 750 miles, and we traveled there in a little over 4 hours, 4.5 hours. This is the train on the outside. This is the inside, 346 kilometers.
Very smooth. You wouldn't know it.
Absolutely, extremely smooth. What is that in miles? 200 and
About 220.
Yeah. So about 210, 220 miles per hour, as smooth as can be. You can see our car was a little hot, 24 degrees Celsius, outdoors, 17 degrees Celsius. And they brought snacks and food, and you could walk up and down freely the whole length of the train, and you could do it easily because the ride was so smooth. Imagine being able to go from New York City to Washington, D.C. in 1 hour. That's what you're talking about. Here's just a picture looking out the window of the train. You can see farmland, other villages, the process of the country developing. I don't know if I included, let me see, I'll go forward. Yeah, this also, you saw them building entirely new cities, and everything carefully planned. If you look at, these are all newly planted trees. China has had a very aggressive green the desert program. We saw a lot of areas where clearly new trees, new vegetation have been planted. And what we also kept commenting on is their tall buildings are spaced apart so that everyone can have access to the sun. It's all designed to be very livable. So here we are. We arrived in Shanghai, and Shanghai was the central trading point, also point of attack by the British and their opium wars. And you see here the very interesting combination of old Western European buildings built in the largely late 1800s, a lot of them, or mid 1800s. Here is the Peace Hotel. And then you see the new modern, across the river there is the Pearl TV Tower, which was kind of amazing. It was lit up in all different colors at night, and the modern financial center. Anything you want to say about this, Chris?
No. I mean, Shanghai was amazing. It was an amazing. It was completely clean. You can see just how clean it is. This was around I don't know, around 9:30 at night. Um, Everybody's out. This is the major the major street, major shopping street in old Shanghai, and everybody's out. It's completely safe. Nobody fears anything walking around at night in Shanghai or Beijing for that matter, but in Shanghai. So it's really quite something, quite beautiful.
This is the U Garden, and there really is an aesthetic which I'm hoping to give you a sense of. There were 5 of these dragons. I think that's right. Is it, Chris? 5 dragons.
Can't remember. I didn't count them. But
I think that was the number along the wall. So you see its head here, and it stretches quite some length at the top of the wall. But the aesthetic of their gardens has to do with the relationship between the architecture, the sky, the shape of what you see in the sky, the plants, the rocks, and water. So water, rock, anyway, I think it's 4 principles. There's more description. Maybe I'm not quite getting it right, but I just wanted, and again, totally crowded, but so huge. You still get a sense of the peacefulness and the beauty of it. Here's another picture of Chris with some of the water, the ponds there. So you see the relationship again between the rocks, the water, the structures, etc.
and this is a park. It's a park right in the middle of Shanghai. You know, you go into this park. It's surrounded by tall buildings and all kinds of things around it. But in this park, it's this tranquil place that people can go to.
And remember, we're in October, so all of the flowers are not necessarily in bloom, although there were a lot of flowers still blooming in Shanghai, but late season. Here, I just wanted to show this. Here's the guy power washing the sidewalk outside of the hotel where we stayed. They do this every morning, and everywhere you go, you see people who are cleaning the streets. They are spotless. I think this would be a great model for New York City, which is filthy, has hundreds of thousands of unemployed or barely employed people. We could make it a project to make New York City beautiful again. Of course, that would mean picking up the garbage sooner, not having it sitting there for 24 hours. I was surprised, actually, we didn't see any big trash trucks. They have guys on these electric bicycles carrying trash, like 4 garbage cans at a time, clearly to some centralized location, an incinerator or something. That also was kind of mysterious to me, but I guess by having all these individual people collecting the trash, you could do it more regularly. You definitely didn't have trash cans overflowing with stuff landing on the ground. I mean, you consider the importance of sanitation and think about how these streets are kept in New York City. It's really shameful and totally not necessary. And on the security question, I will say, yes, there were a lot of police. There's cameras everywhere. For Americans, you may say this is oppressive, but I hate to tell you, there's cameras everywhere in the US, and they're not so visible. And you will find that things can be brought up, your personal emails or this or that, when you least expect it. The police largely, I was looking to see how they were armed. A lot of them are not armed. A lot of them did not have guns. Some did. The ones we saw mostly with weapons were actually private security outside banks at night or things like that. But mainly they were there just to keep order, not aggressive or offensive. They'd pull over one of these bikes occasionally if they were riding in the pedestrian area or something like that. And a friend of ours ran a traffic light on the way to meet us for dinner and got pulled over and had a ticket, which was 200 yuan, about $30. So not designed to punish you or break your bank account, but just a warning not to drive recklessly. Although we were sort of amazed that given the way these electric bikes are all over the place, that we didn't see anybody getting run over the entire time we were there. And Chris has a whole theory about that, which maybe you'd like to share, Chris.
Well, there was definitely in my view, a kind of harmony that that became clear over time. That you, at first, when you see it, you just have to get used to it, because the motorcycles can continue to go even when other when the car traffic is stopped. They're in a different lane, and but you have the green to walk across. So if you start walking, they will stop for you. The motorcycles will stop for you, or they will keep going in such a way as to miss you. It was just fascinating to me. Once you got a sense of it, you were able to get around, and really not, as long as you were aware of what was going on around you, you were safe to cross the street.
But it was really alarming and mysterious at the beginning. And there
Alarming and mysterious at first, for sure.
Hundreds and hundreds of these motorcycles and electric bikes, and it is can be overwhelming to look at. And a lot of them are delivering food, and apparently they only have 30 minutes in which time to get the food to where it has to go, which is why they seem to get special dispensation on turning left on red, which we saw a lot of, and other kinds of peculiar things.
Yeah. I was just going to say the other thing about police in China. You know, our direct experience with a police officer, excuse me, was that we were having problems getting on the train. We had gotten tickets, but our names were reversed from our passport, because they always put the last name first, and we put our first name last, not realizing. And so anyway, we were trying to get across to this guy taking the tickets, that we had to get on this train and just look at our passport, look at the number, etc. And in other cases, they were very helpful. Actually, on the way up to Badaming, they were very helpful. But on the way back, he just decided he wasn't going to try to understand what we were saying, and he wasn't going to let us on the train. So we ran into a police officer, showed the police officer what was going on. We were using our Google Translate, to speak English and translate it into Chinese, and then hold up the microphone and have him speak Chinese and translate it into English. And he did understand, and took it upon himself to then go over to the ticket people and then walk us down to this person, and had kind of a back and forth with him. The guy was still being obstinate, and the officer basically just said, "Let them go onto the train." And so we did, and it was pretty neat. But we got direct action to rectify the situation.
Exactly. Okay. So next. Oh yeah, so here we are this is another garden. It looks like a scene from outer space. But again, I just want to show the incredible harmony of the plant. This is a park. We went running here one morning, and you see the beautiful greenery and the way that it's sort of designed with the architecture, the city in the background, just really beautiful. And it was particularly beautiful in the morning to walk along the river and watch the barges going back and forth, which usually happened between, I don't know how early they started, but 7 and 9 in the morning. Now let me see if there's more. Oops. So that's it for the pictures. And I thought we should just discuss a little bit about what we learned of the political dynamic, because we're getting so much propaganda here about China. And I think people really don't understand it. And they also say really stupid things like, well, I just hate Xi Jinping. I just hate the Communist Party, but I love the Chinese people. Well, the Chinese people love their government, and particularly younger people, as one person explained to us who runs a YouTuber now. I guess it's Billy, similar to YouTube in China. They have 200 million followers. So I think she does have a sense of what's on their mind. She said, you have to understand that younger people, their late 20s, early 30s, have watched their families come out of poverty into the middle class. And they love Xi Jinping and they love this government and they are very patriotic. And you can't imagine when President Trump shifted. First, it had looked like there were going to be very promising relations with China. And then he shifted because I think he was told or whatever that it was politically expedient to blame the COVID pandemic on China, to being hostile and saying all kinds of nasty things about the CCP, how angry the young people became. That is something to know. And that because China is a meritocracy, there are not elections for president, but whoever becomes president has to prove themselves by having success on the lower levels in a city, in a province, and then you are obligated to, in a sense, uphold the general welfare of the population. And they have a process, something like a suggestion box, where people can make their views known, and the government actually is responsive. Now, it can be a slow process, but there is actual change. It actually shifts. Also, on the local level, for mayor and smaller level officials, there are elections. And I found it somewhat ironic that one person who was explaining this to us, who considers themselves to be a real diehard Marxist, nonetheless was adamant that the most important thing in local politics is the business owners. You have to have entrepreneurs. You have to be able to demonstrate that you can run a business before you can become a mayor. And I think the kind of stereotypical view that Americans have about communism in China, it's really not what you think. Another point, a younger person who was talking about having studied in Canada, the healthcare system, et cetera, said that Canada was much more communistic than China. So it's very different. Whereas in the United States, we have elections and you think that your elected official is supposed to be responsive to you, but somehow so much big money has come into it. There is massive corruption, and it seems that once people are elected, they no longer feel like they have to respond to the population. It's very different there. And I think if you asked various of the people in China, particularly young people, they would tell you that they believe they do live in a democratic society where they can have an impact on what the policies are.
Yeah, I mean, our taxi cab driver that picked us up from the train station and took us to our hotel in downtown Shanghai. We would tend to strike up conversations with our taxi cab drivers. It was some of the most interesting discussions that we had with our Google our Google Translate going on. And we said to him that the media in the United States says that the Chinese people are very unhappy under their oppressive government. But from what we had seen, people seemed pretty happy. And he said, "Oh, we're very happy. We have a sense that we can improve our lives. Um, and so that's, I think I think that the problem is, and we discussed this actually with a group of young people that were running this internet uh, um, think tank. We had like a 3 or 4 hour long discussion with them back and forth, which was fascinating to me because I mean the one thing that we agreed on is that the problem of nominalism is really an issue. That, oh, it's the Chinese Communist Party. Oh, they're communists. Okay, communists are bad. I'm an American. I'm for freedom. I'm against communism. It's a simple-minded approach where you're not trying to actually understand what they're talking about, what they're doing. Now, we had a dialogue with an economist who was also there, a Chinese economist who advises Xi Jinping, and this was an amazing discussion. Now, he knows all about the American system of political economy. He has read Friedrich List. He knows Alexander Hamilton. He has read Alexander Hamilton. And what we decided, what we came to, was that actually what the Chinese are doing right now is very much modeled on Hamiltonian economics, American system economics, that is investment in basic public infrastructure, public credit for productive activities, for manufacturing, for agriculture, things of this nature, that this is actually American system economics. So if you strip away the names of things and instead you actually try to look at the essence of things, the essence of what you're talking about, you find that there's a compatibility between what built the United States and what is building China right now, very, very rapidly. And the biggest thing I think for Americans to think about is, how come you don't know Alexander Hamilton? How come you don't know the American system of political economy? How come you don't know Friedrich List, the international fighter for the American system of political economy? How come you don't know your own history? How come you don't know what built our nation? Well, it's been stripped away from you. It's been taken away from you. Your actual history has been taken away from you. And so at this point, and this was, I think, one of the things that the Chinese found hardest to understand, because actually they want to be our friends. They don't have any ill will towards the United States. They are beginning to acquire it because the United States is insisting on making them the enemy. We are insisting on saying they're the enemy. Joe Biden, our Congress, our Senate are insisting on saying, you are the enemy. You are a threat. What's China going to do? You keep telling somebody they're the enemy, they become the enemy. Now, they don't want to be our enemy. And again in our discussions, in our dialogues, when we said, hey, what we would like to see, our vision of the future is the United States, Russia, and China working together to solve the problems facing mankind. And they were totally excited about that idea. But unfortunately, less and less hopeful that that could be accomplished, because the United States, our dear nation, is acting so crazy right now, so militaristic, just starting problems everywhere. We started a problem between Ukraine and Russia. That doesn't work out to our liking. And now we're starting a problem in the Middle East. And maybe next we'll start a problem in Taiwan. We're certainly, moving in that direction. So we've got to change the direction of the United States. We've got to become a partner that can work with Russia, with China, and solve the problems. And one other thought I had was that when Diane was showing that Oasis plan, I used to think, well, that's a beautiful idea. But and Lyndon LaRouche always used to say, you're not going to solve the problem in the Middle East until you get shovels in the ground to start developing the area. And you say, well, that's true. I can see how that's true, but I don't know how it's going to happen. Well, now with what China's doing, you can see exactly how it's going to happen. It will happen. The Chinese are able to bring that kind of rapid development into any area that is willing to work with them. And the Chinese are not saying you've got to change your government in order to do this. You have to democratize. You have to follow the rule of law, the internet, the rules-based order. You have to blah blah blah. No, just work with us. It's win-win. We'll help you develop. Look at go back to that map in your mind. Look at Egypt right next to Gaza and Israel. What's Egypt doing right now? They're building whole new cities. They're building new industrial cities. They just doubled the size of the canal. I mean, this is actually happening. You don't hear about it in the US news media. Why would that be of interest to you? That Egypt is doing that they're working with Russia, that they're working with China, that they've just joined the BRICS plus, and look at the economic development going on there. And it's been in the last 5 years that this has gone on. Then turn and look at the United States. Look at the dilapidated state of our cities. One of the things that this professor who had been in the United States, he actually taught at Cornell University up in Ithaca. He said the problem with the American kids is that they don't want to study. They want to take drugs. They want to party. They don't want to study. He couldn't understand it. He couldn't fathom why young people at an engineering school, one of the best engineering schools in the world, presumably, Cornell, that they didn't want to study. Now, we said to him, well, the problem is the United States has no mission right now. There's no mission. And we discussed Franklin Roosevelt. We discussed the New Deal. We discussed the Tennessee Valley Authority, and that kind of massive, rapid economic development that FDR did. So, we have that in our history. We have that in the not so distant past in the United States. We did that. And it was studied by the Chinese, actually. The Three Gorges Dam in China was based on studies of the Tennessee Valley Authority. Americans don't know that. So much of our history and who we are and what we've accomplished has been completely stripped from us. And I think Diane's campaign is a voice for the whole nation to give us back our real American history, and we can come to our right minds again, and we can become a partner with other nations on the planet for win-win cooperation and development. But I just think you who are listening to this right now, you have to really think inside and check your axioms and just be honest with yourself. What do you really know? What do you really know about what you think is true? How do you know what you think is true? Have you really tested it? Have you really questioned your axioms and thought through and said, maybe been a little humble and say, well, maybe I actually don't know. Maybe I'm just getting this from the lying news media, as you like to call it. It is the lying news media, and yet again and again, people go back to it to get the news. So, you know that they lied about the Iraq war and one thing after the next and one thing after the next. But then you turn on the TV set and you say, oh, I hate China. I hate Russia. I think we have to go to war. And then what? 5 years later, you realize that you were wrong. What happens when it's too late? So I just want to say, I think Diane's campaign is really, really critical, not just because I'm her husband, but because I can see historically her campaign is critical for this whole nation. And I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And I tend to agree with you merely because the standard is so low. So we have to wrap up now. I hope people have found this informative. Please put questions and comments in the chat. We'll work on getting back to you, and I would urge people to act now. Lyndon LaRouche had written in an open letter to the DNC way back in 2003, when he also attempted to see if there was anything to be salvaged in the Democratic Party, which clearly there is not now, that the key to stopping the end of civilization or the potential annihilation of the human race in nuclear war is that the United States must return to its senses. We have to return to our founding principles. We have to think about our relations to other countries on the planet in the way that John Quincy Adams would think about them, or what George Washington intended, which is very clear in his farewell address. That was the legacy of Lyndon LaRouche. That's the tradition that I'm bringing to this campaign for U.S. Senate from New York. After all, this state where George Washington was sworn in, where the Federalist Papers were written and circulated. And I would urge everybody watching, mobilize yourself. You cannot be a spectator. We cannot not allow the annihilation of 2.3 million people in Gaza before our eyes in the name of collective punishment. Mankind can do better than that, and we have to. Otherwise, only we are responsible for what happens, and the United States is crucial in this. So thank you for listening. Also, please sign up on my website. Please donate to the campaign. I need the funds to make my voice heard by a wider and wider audience, and we'll be talking soon.